Have you ever imagined what it would be like to drive a car powered by a jet engine? Not some distant future concept, not a movie prop, but a real car you could take to the grocery store, drive to work, or use for a cross-country road trip. In 1963, this actually happened. Chrysler built 55 turbine-powered cars and handed them to ordinary families across America. And here's the twist. These cars could run on almost anything. Tequila, perfume, even peanut oil. This is the story of one of the boldest experiments in automotive history and why it all went up in flames. The dream began in 1954 when Chrysler unveiled the world's first gas turbine-powered car. But this was not some overnight brainstorm. The project started in 1945 when Chrysler engineers began developing turbine technology for the U.S. Navy. By 1953, workers at Chrysler's Highland Park complex witnessed something extraordinary. A turbine-powered Plymouth whirring across the test grounds, sounding more like a taxiing Boeing than a family sedan. The mastermind was George Hubner, Chrysler's chief turbine engineer. His pitch was compelling. The turbine engine had only 60 moving parts compared to 300 in a conventional piston engine. No spark plugs, no oil changes. The engine produced 130 horsepower and 425 pound-feet of torque, while the turbine spun at a mind-bending 44,500 RPM. Your average car engine redlines at maybe 6,000 RPM. This thing was spinning 7 times faster. But having a revolutionary engine was just the beginning. Chrysler needed a car that looked as futuristic as the technology inside it. Enter Elwood Engel, fresh from Ford, where he'd styled the iconic 1961 Lincoln Continental. For the turbine car, he wanted something that screamed jet age from every angle. The bodies were handcrafted by the legendary Italian design house GHIA, then shipped across the Atlantic in massive crates. Every single car emerged in the same mesmerizing finish. Turbine bronze, a metallic root beer color never seen before. The design featured massive taillights that looked like jet afterburners and headlights suspended in openings resembling air intakes. Even the tires had miniature turbine vanes molded into the white sidewalls. Inside, copper-toned bucket seats surrounded dashboard gauges calibrated for things no normal car needed, like a temperature gauge running up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But Chrysler didn't build these stunning machines to sit in showrooms. They had a far bolder plan. On October 29, 1963, in Chicago, Chrysler's president handed the keys to Mr. and Mrs. Richard Viaja of Broadview. They weren't engineers. They weren't celebrities. Just ordinary people about to become the first members of the public to drive a jet-powered car. Chrysler's plan was audacious. Build 55 cars, then loan them to 203 drivers in 133 cities for 3 months each, completely free. From October 1963 to January 1966, these families collectively drove more than 1 million miles. Each car cost $50,000 to build, nearly $400,000 in today's dollars. And Chrysler was handing them to strangers. So what was it like to drive one? And what could these engines really run on? January 1964, Mexico City. During the Turbine Cars International Tour, President Adolfo López Mateos had heard stories about the car's legendary multi-fuel capability. He asked the Chrysler representative a question that caught everyone off guard. Could it run on tequila? The rep had absolutely no idea. He immediately called George Hubner back in Detroit. Hubner dispatched someone to a local liquor store to buy cheap tequila, poured it into a test turbine engine, and called back with the answer. It worked perfectly. Several bottles of 80-proof tequila were poured into the car's tank, and President Mateos took a ride in the world's first tequila-fueled automobile. But tequila was just the beginning. At a press gala in Paris, Chrysler pulled off an even more extravagant demonstration, running the car on Chanel No. 5 perfume.
Witnesses reported the exhaust actually gave off a pleasant scent. Then there was Jerry Gross, one of Chrysler's engineers, who took a turbine car to a peanut festival and ran it on pure peanut oil. It worked flawlessly, though Gross noted the exhaust smelled exactly like a restaurant kitchen. Engineers tested it on diesel fuel, kerosene, jet fuel, home heating oil, vegetable oil. The turbine would burn almost anything combustible, the one fuel to avoid. Leaded gasoline. It would run on it, but the lead deposits would damage the turbine's delicate internals. But how did actual families feel about living with these space-age machines? Imagine your morning commute sounding like you're piloting a Boeing 737. The feedback from 203 test families was mixed. Drivers loved the incredibly smooth operation with virtually no vibration. It started easily, even in the coldest weather. No rough idles, no misfires, no temperamental carburetors. The instant torque was impressive. Floor the accelerator, and the turbine would spin up with a rising jet whine that turned heads everywhere. But the problems were equally notable. Unimpressive acceleration, poor fuel economy, excessive noise. The lag between pressing the accelerator and feeling power was frustrating in stop-and-go traffic. While the turbine excelled at highway speeds, it gulped fuel in city driving. 5 specially trained mechanics worked full-time just to keep the fleet running. The test results were promising enough that Chrysler prepared for production. Then reality intervened. When the program ended in January 1966, Chrysler faced an uncomfortable truth. A mid-range car cost about $3,000 in the 1960s. The turbine engine alone cost $10,000 or more to manufacture. Building a factory for mass production would cost an estimated $1 billion. Impossible. There were other issues. The turbine produced substantially more nitrogen oxides than piston engines. As environmental regulations tightened in the late 1960s, this became a deal-breaker. But the most heartbreaking part came next. Of the 55 turbine cars built, 46 were destroyed. You might have heard about import duties on the Italian bodies being the reason. That's incorrect. By the time Chrysler was deciding, those duties had dropped to almost nothing. The real reason was pragmatic. Chrysler didn't want prototypes in the wild without parts or service support. What happened next was brutal. Employees punched holes in gas tanks, drained the fuel, poured it into those beautiful Italian interiors, and burned the cars. It was a day when, as one observer noted, grown men cried at Chrysler. But 9 cars survived. Where are they now? Chrysler kept 3. 6 were deactivated and donated to museums. The Henry Ford Museum, the Smithsonian, the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles, the National Museum of Transportation in St. Louis, the Detroit Historical Society, and Harrah's Auto Collection. Here's where it gets interesting. Chrysler sent each museum crated turbine engines. The St. Louis Museum swapped their crated engine for the non-functional one in their car and got it running. The Harrah's car changed hands multiple times, eventually landing with collector Frank Kleptz. When he acquired it, the car didn't run until his friend Jay Leno made calls to Chrysler and secured a working turbine engine. Leno later convinced Chrysler to sell him one of their 3 remaining cars, which now sits in his Big Dog garage in California. In 2021, the Kleptz car sold to Stahl's Automotive Collection in Michigan. Of the 9 survivors, 5 still run. 2 are in private hands, and Chrysler still owns 2. The turbine car represents one of the bold experiments in automotive history. Chrysler's turbine program continued for 30 years total through 7 generations of engines into the early 1980s, but they never cleared the hurdles for mass production. These 9 surviving cars aren't just museum pieces. They're proof that sometimes the most important innovations aren't the ones that succeed. They're the ones that dare to try something completely different. So the next time someone tells you we're living in the future, remember, in 1963, families were already driving jet-powered cars that ran on tequila. Maybe the future isn't something we're heading toward. Maybe we've already been there and decided it was too expensive. What do you think? Should modern automakers revisit turbine technology? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this, subscribe and check out the recommended video on screen. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.